Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, What FPSA Members Need to Know About the Employee Retention Credit, presented by Allegiant Group. I want to thank Allegiant Group for hosting this webinar today on this really important topic. Let me toss it over now to Jennifer Groff. Jennifer? Oh, we can't hear you, Jennifer.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. We had just muted ourselves. But yeah, thank you so much for allowing us to be with you all today, spending some time with us away from your busy schedules. So we're really excited to talk about this. You know, we really are passionate about helping U.S. businesses, and this employee retention credit, especially the revisions to it, have been so powerful that we're going to go into more detail about it. So hopefully you walk away with some tangible takeaways of what to do next as it relates to this incentive. But we personally here at Alliant Group, we've been working with FPSA members for a number of years now. We actually just got updated numbers. We've delivered about $20 million in credits and incentives to many of you and your peers. So hopefully we can help you out with some more of that benefit. But let me see if they'll go. There we go. So I'm here with my colleague, Groff Johnson. He heads up our employee retention credit practice, really the go-to expert when it comes to this incentive. So he is joining alongside me. He and I collectively have delivered over $300 million in credits and cash refunds to many of the small and medium-sized businesses, and actually many of those in the food and beverage industry. So we're really happy to be here. And as you can tell, that $300 million is pretty much a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of our team and what we've done these past few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to elaborate on what Jen was saying about our successful, time here at Alliant Group in delivering credits and incentives to small to mid-sized businesses, over the past 20 years, we've delivered over $13 billion. And really the reason why we exist is there's over 7,000 different credits and incentives in the tax code. So it's virtually impossible for anyone to be an expert in all of them. That's why we partner with over 4,000 CPA firms across the United States. We act as their back office, really just, providing them with the necessary tools and resources to help them be more successful and make sure that their clients are taken care of with anything tax related in regards to credits and incentives. So over the past 20 years, we've done over 60,000 credits and incentives tax studies. And so this work is something that we're extremely passionate about. Really looking forward to diving into the details of ERC and hopefully providing you guys with some more value as well.
Absolutely. And to Jonathan's point, as a tax consulting firm, we're not here to take the place of your CPA, but be almost a value-added component to it and work alongside your CPA when it comes to these specific incentives.
And as you can see, this is our strategic leadership team. Several people on this page have been instrumental in getting these incentives passed. Two people that I want to highlight: Dean Zerbe, former senior counsel to the U.S. Senate Finance Committee, and Rick Lazio, former United States Congressman of New York. Over the past year and a half, these people have been lobbying and making sure that our small to mid-sized companies were taken care of, they were served, they were represented, and so they were extremely instrumental in getting the employee retention credit passed and making sure that these dollars were available to you guys.
Definitely. And, this is our three-prong approach when it comes to how we serve you, how we serve our CPA partners with this incentive. So to Jonathan's point, former senior counsel, U.S. Senate Finance Committee, Dean Zerbe and Don Levy, both were really instrumental in getting legislation passed, not just on these incentives, but a lot of tax matters for the past couple of years, past couple of decades. So they understand it from the intent, from the idea. Why is this getting put in place? What is the ultimate goal of this incentive, or the ultimate action they want you as a business owner to take as a result of this incentive? So we mirror that with 4 of the 7 living IRS commissioners who are on our board, who's the enforcement. And actually what's funny about that is Mark Everson, as you can see on that page, was known as the enforcer at the IRS. So when we put this legislation in place, right, well, how do you interpret that? What is the service wanting to see? What is the service? How is the service saying what qualifies, what doesn't qualify? So they can interpret that tax code or that tax incentive. And then my favorite part is talking about our people. So we have over 1,000 industry professionals. Many of them come from the food and beverage industry. So whenever you are talking to them about your company, they really understand it from an industry perspective. We have biologists, chemists, we have PhDs, we have folks that really understand not just these tax incentives, but understand your business. So when we mirror all of that together, we really want to make sure we're being a great partner, a great value for you, for your CPA as well. And the employee retention credit. So, many of you out there may be familiar with it, but may be familiar with the old rules and regulations that came out last year on it. There's been some updates, some new guidance that we're going to be sharing with you. But at the end of the day, the employee retention credit was put in place to reward U.S. businesses for keeping employees on staff through the pandemic. In the past year, past couple of months, we know that many folks have been hit hard by the pandemic. Well, as we're going on the outside to it, as we're seeing some recovery, what does this credit mean to you? How can you implement it to be able to get some extra cash in hand, right, to help your business? And Jonathan's going to be talking about this, but we haven't seen a refundable credit in decades, right? The last refundable credit that came out was in 2008. So this is definitely a time to look at this. Unfortunately, we call this a sunset incentive, meaning there's only a couple quarters that you can look at for this and take advantage of it before it expires.
Absolutely. And if you just look at the overall opportunity here, the fact that it's fully refundable, 20 years in business, Alliant Group, we haven't seen a credit as strong as this one. This is a really, really strong opportunity. In regards to a fully refundable tax credit, what I mean by that is, in the event you as a business owner are entitled to more credits than actual liability, that difference, you're going to get it in the form of a check as a cash refund from the Treasury. So if you look at your 941 that was filed quarterly in the payroll tax that you're liable for each quarter, say you're entitled to paying $100 in payroll tax, and we take a look at the credit, we determine that you're entitled to $200 in credits, you're going to wipe out all the liability, and that additional $100, you'll get it in the form of a check as a cash refund. So on a bigger stage, bigger picture, if you amplify that and look at your entire business, depending on how many employees you have, how the pandemic affected your overall operations, it can turn into high five figures, low six figures in credits. You can take this, it's cash, you can use it as you please. You can reinvest it back into your business, hire more people, upgrade equipment, etc. It's been tremendous for a lot of small to mid-sized businesses so far.
Absolutely. And something I want to highlight as you're thinking of this, so this is a credit that offsets, to Jonathan's point, your payroll tax, right? Your quarterly payroll tax. So regardless of your federal, your personal tax situation, that doesn't matter. We would specifically be looking at how it applies to your payroll tax. So as I was mentioning, there's a lot of history behind the employee retention credit. It was put in place last year under the CARES Act. However, with the intent of it of helping U.S. businesses, when it was put in place, there were so many restrictions that there was a lot of negative feedback about it, right? If you took the PPP loan, chances are you didn't even look at this because it was an either or. So as Congress and as folks started hearing feedback saying, hey, this incentive sounds great, but nobody's taking advantage of it, they heard that, they made some changes and some updates, right? So end of December, beginning of January, they updated and put a new version out. So for example, when we say it made it easier for the taxpayer to obtain this credit, the reason for that is because they alleviated a lot of the restrictions. For starters, last year, you really had to experience a decline in revenue of 50%. That was it. If you didn't experience that, chances are you probably weren't going to be able to qualify for this credit. Now we can look at it two ways. We can look at it, did you experience a decline in revenue of 20%? So it went from 50 to 20. And then can you use it, right? But then also, did you experience a disruption? So disruption is going to mean a lot of things for each and every company. A disruption for company A is going to be different than company B. So that's something to keep in mind as well as you're looking at this. So just because you didn't experience a decline in revenue doesn't mean you won't be able to qualify. Now, also, it increased the amount of the credit. So this is great. It went from $5,000 per employee to $7,000 per employee. Now, that doesn't mean that every single employee will get $7,000 back, right? You really need to make sure you're doing that employee by employee analysis, because some may qualify at $1,000, some may qualify at $7,000. But at least there's more of a benefit available to you. And then you can also now look at it alongside the PPP loan. So we'll go into more detail on that. But what's great about this is it's no longer an either or. It's a side by side. So we have many clients that are maximizing on both incentives and being able to take advantage of both incentives. So,
and Jen, just to elaborate on qualifications and just some of the modifications they made through the latest Consolidated Appropriations Act into December, early January. If you look at the 5,500 clients we currently have signed up, I'd tell you the vast majority of the businesses that we're working with did not experience a revenue decline. They're qualifying under the business disruption guidelines. And these are businesses that were deemed essential, continue to operate, never shut down, but they experienced a ton of different disruptions to their normal business operations. And we can elaborate in that further into the presentation.
Right.
So,
yep. And to Jonathan's point, what you really need to be thinking about as we're going through this is if the pandemic never happened, would you have had to adjust or change your day-to-day business operations? That's really and truly what the intent of this and what they're trying to see. Now, it could be larger changes for some, smaller changes for others, but that's really the mindset where this credit comes in, and that's what really changes it for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and so this is just one of the case studies that we wanted to highlight. Going back to qualifications, right? Setting revenue aside, this particular business, they did not experience any sort of revenue decline. They actually, from my understanding, they actually grew in 2020. They continued to operate. They were an essential business, but they had a ton of supply chain issues. There was delays in supplies, products, raw materials, and as a result of that, their ability to complete projects on time, deliver to their clients, it was completely disrupted. And so that's one of the qualifications in regards to, if you look at the regs and requirements, any business that dealt with any supply chain issue that affected their ability to perform as they would in a normal year, that could position them well to potentially qualify for the credit. And as you can see, this business only has 30 employees. And for one quarter alone, we got them back $200,000. So this is real cash that they're going to get back, put it in their pockets. They're going to reinvest it back into their business. So the opportunity here is very substantial.
Yes, and to talk about the supply chain issue specifically, because we've seen a lot of that within the food and beverage industry, truly. So we're not just looking at the materials coming in, right, to update your product or to ship that on out to your clients. So it's not just products coming in, but also, are you able to get on site and see your clients? There were a lot of rules and regulations, a lot of non-essential personnel couldn't come in. So when you're talking about supply chain from the aspect of how you interact with your clients or getting products out to your clients or visiting clients or your salespeople visiting clients, that's something else to keep in mind because all of that from breadth to depth can actually qualify you for those credits.
Yeah, absolutely. And this page is just to highlight some of the common misconceptions, right? The myths that are related to the employee retention credit. A lot of people from the position of being an essential business, they look at their operations in the entire year of 2020 and say, hey, we never shut down. We continue to operate. We had no shutdowns. That's not a requirement, right? So what you can look at is your entire ecosystem of business, like Jen said, your supply chain, your ability to go see your clients in person, the delays that you dealt with in 2020 from getting raw materials, where the price is inflated. What is your business development team typically do in a normal year? Are they going on site and meeting clients, conferences, trade shows? I'm sure there was restrictions that were put in place that limited your ability to attend those. These are some of the myths that we want to take a look at that are allowing businesses in your industry to qualify at a very, very high rate. And so just wanted to provide you with a couple of examples just to make sure that we're looking through the same lens and not self-censoring and determining that we don't qualify simply because we continue to operate one essential business and we didn't have any experience from a decline in revenue per se.
Right. And here's the thing too, an example of when we talk about, two things I want to highlight was that a reduction in hours to accommodate sanitation. Obviously with FDA, with OSHA guidelines, many folks had to do it, but what they did instead was they did shift work. So they spaced their employees out into two different shifts. So even though they felt like they really didn't reduce hours overall, if you created two sets of shifts, your employees were reducing their hours. So even though meeting those basic guidelines, you were like, no, I still stayed open, we still functioned. But the fact that they had to introduce those two shifts was a qualification for this. And when we talk about a shutdown of select facilities, I honestly don't even like the term shutdown because there's so many different variations of it. for example, if your facility, if the operations part of your facility stayed open, but let's say your front office folks, let's say your admin, your finance folks had to work remote, work from home, those could be areas that we could look at as well. And we also talk about a suspension of employees. So let's say, for example, one of your employees had COVID or was exposed to somebody who had COVID. You still paid them, right? And they came back to work, but that period where you paid them to not work is another qualification.
And then bullet point 3, having limited capacity to operate. I mean, there was many different limitations around capacity, right? Social distancing guidelines, the 6 feet, social distancing. As a result of that, we've seen that there was restrictions around the amount of people that can actually be at the facility. And as a result of that, the overall productivity and the volume took a hit. So that could be a potential way to qualify for the credit as well.
Absolutely.
And then, yes, this page, one of the most common misconceptions, I can't claim ERC if I've already claimed PPP. Now, like we said in the previous slide, what happened was they made some modifications to the actual credit in the bill because they originally when it came out, there was a restriction. It was an either or situation. Either you took advantage of PPP or you looked at ERC. But in the latest Consolidated Appropriations Act, into December, early January, they lifted that restriction retroactively, and now you can take advantage of both. We just have to be mindful when it comes to actually calculating the credit, not double dipping expenses, and we can elaborate on that in another slide coming up.
Yep, absolutely. And what's great about the employee retention credit versus the PPP loan, I mean, I know many of you are already in the process of asking for forgiveness, already received forgiveness. There's no question that these credits are yours. There's no question that, oh, if I claim this credit, do I have to pay it back? No, these are for you. So something to keep in mind too. Perfect.
And then, so like I said, we currently have 5,500 clients currently signed up, and I'll tell you the vast majority, probably 90% of the businesses that we're helping, they took advantage of PPP-1. A large percent of them took advantage of PPP-2 as well. And the main reason why we're still having success identifying that there's still leftover wages we can calculate and allocate towards the calculation is because, as you guys know, PPP is only equivalent to 2.5 times your payroll. And if you have a 24-week coverage period, naturally there's going to be some leftover wages that were not covered by those PPP dollars. Mm-hmm. So whatever is left over, we can then take a look at it, see if it's qualified, and allocate towards the ERC calculation. And we've still had a ton of success identifying and determining very, very substantial outcomes for those businesses.
Well, and to Jonathan's point, even if you only could, let's say, for example, one employee, you really only did, let's say 50% of their wages, you only took a small percentage of their wages, we can still look at the other end of that. So it's not an all or nothing when it comes to this. And that's why I mentioned the employee by employee analysis is so critical to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table or not calculating the wages that you should be.
Perfect. And then as far as just the complexity around calculating the credit itself, there's multiple layers of complexity, multiple things you have to consider. The interplay between PPP, like I said, you can't double dip on the expenses. So you have to bifurcate anything that you allocated on the PPP forgiveness application, make sure that's completely separated, see what's left over, and then you have to determine if those leftover wages are actually qualified for themselves as well. Also, any other payroll wage-driven incentive, R&D, WOTC, FFCRA, EIDL, all these other programs that are available, if you took advantage of those, we also have to take that in consideration. Mm-hmm. And then also the full or partial suspension test, the business disruption guidelines. Per the tax code, you have to build an argument or a technical narrative that your overall operations were disrupted more than a nominal percent. And how the IRS defines that was your overall business disrupted more than 10%. And that's the work that our team will do. And that's why we built out a database internally that has every government order from a federal, local, state, municipal, county level. And we basically take that database and cross-reference it with your location, your industry, your vendors and suppliers you work directly with, as well as your customers, to make a determination if we can identify a mandate that affected your business more than a nominal percent.
Yeah, and to Jonathan's point, here's the thing is when we talk about like our former IRS commissioners and making sure we're dotting all our T's, or dotting all our I's, crossing all our T's, that suspension test, the justification to it is really extremely critical. Unfortunately, it's not just numbers on a form. You need to be able to back up those numbers and say, okay, this is how I was impacted. This is the translation and the calculation and what we're going to get as a benefit. But, here's the thing. And because this is a brand new incentive, it's, a year and a half old, there is going to be some eyes on it, right? And so you really need to make sure that you're justifying this appropriately with what the service is requesting.
And then just another case study for you guys to get your eyes on. Specifically for this example, there's obviously FDA as well as OSHA restrictions that were put in place. This particular company, they dealt with capacity issues. There's social distancing guidelines that were put in place that limited the amount of employees that they could have at their actual location, as well as when they went and saw their customers that they worked directly with. And so as a result of that, their overall productivity and the volume that they could actually operate at, it took a hit. So this business, 120 employees, 680,000.
Wow.
I'm sorry, 680,000. There's a typo there. $680,000 for one quarter in the form of a cash refund. That's tremendous. They're going to be able to take this money, reinvest back in the business, and like I said, the results have been tremendous. And this is just for one quarter. We have the ability to look at the entire calendar year of 2021, and we can actually go back retroactively and look at credits that they could potentially be entitled to in 2020 as well.
Yep, actually, so if you're thinking that's 7-8 quarters that you could look at, that money adds up very, very quickly.
Perfect. Another example, just the industry as a whole, like I said, it's been a very, very highly qualified industry. This particular company, they dealt with shift changes, right? There was multiple shifts. It affected their overall volume and productivity. There were restrictions around the amount of employees that they could have at the actual site. They had some supply chain problems as well, but a little smaller business, 24 employees, a $64,000 credit for one quarter. As you can see, these dollars are adding very quickly.
Absolutely. And I see there's some repetition. There's a theme here that, a lot of these folks are qualifying under that disruption piece and not qualifying under the decline in revenue, right?
Yeah, one thing that I want to elaborate on and make sure that everybody's mindful, all the case studies that we included in today's presentation, all those businesses qualified under the business disruption guidelines. And these companies were deemed essential, continued to operate, never shut down, did not experience a revenue test. So I just want to make sure that everybody is mindful. They're not self-censoring. Even if they had a banner year in 2020, things are going great for them now. If you had any sort of disruption to your normal business operations throughout the entire year, it makes sense for us to at least have a preliminary conversation. Typically takes 10, 15 minutes. Myself, Jen, will get on the phone, ask them a few pointed questions around what your business looked like. What are some of the different challenges, adjustments, obstacles you had to face as a business owner to continue to operate, retain your employees, and basically fight through the pandemic? From my perspective, your industry and the work that you do could potentially position you well to find very, very tremendous results.
Right. And what's funny is, Jonathan and I were on the phone with a food and beverage company with them in this industry, and they said, look, we had a record-breaking year. It was our best year yet. Well, the question is would it have been better? So yes, you had a record-breaking year, but if you didn't have to do all those adjustments, changes, little tweaks, would it have been even better than that? And that's all those areas that we'll be looking at as well.
Perfect. And I believe we might have a few questions.
I have one question that did come in. Does the entity type of the business matter if they to claim the employee retention credit, like S Corp, C Corp, or anything like that?
It does not matter. You can be an S Corp, C Corp, LLC, ESOP. Does not matter. These credits are going to stay at the entity level. It's very different than, typically how a flow-through entity would work. It's not going to flow through to your personal K-1. Like I said, they'll stay at the entity level, and they're going to offset the payroll tax that goes on your 941, which is filed quarterly.
Okay, great. And we'll open up the floor to other questions as well. If anybody has questions, feel free to submit it into the chat box, and we'll answer them. One other question. If the business wasn't shut down but was impacted by the pandemic, how do they justify this to the service? Like, you guys mentioned the shifts. Is there any other things that you hadn't mentioned in your presentation that might?
So I think and how I'm understanding is how do you go about justifying it? Like, how do you say, hey, service, these are our numbers, this is how we justified it? Jonathan, you can kind of talk a little bit more when he was mentioning like the 10%, if it was impacted more than 10%, that's where our folks can come in and really understand the full breadth and depth and figure out, did it pass the smell test? Did it pass that 10% threshold?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll look at the entire, some of the different challenges, adjustments, obstacles, just the disruption that your business experienced. And as a result of that, what was the opportunity loss? At the end of the day, if we're trying to build a facts and circumstances case, we do have to basically take that database that we talked about that has over 10,000 government orders that our team has analyzed and identify a specific mandate that caused those issues. So that's the work that our team will be doing. But yeah, we definitely do have to tie it back to a mandate that caused those disruptions.
Right. It's very cause and effect, and how do you look at both of those? So that's kind of where that justification comes in.
Okay, and another question that's come in from Arlene, did the rules change at all for July to December compared to January through June for 2021?
No, not at all. Yeah, the rules remain the same. You can qualify under the business disruption guidelines as well as the revenue test of having more than a 20% decline in revenue.
I think the one thing that did change, it really didn't change anything, any of the qualifications, but it just extended it. So previously when it came out, you could only look at the first 2 quarters in 2021. Now you can look at all of the quarters in 2021. So that was the adjustment or the change. But to Jonathan's point, nothing from a
qualification perspective, yeah.
Okay, great. And if a company is claiming other credits and incentives besides the PP loan, like an RD or WTC, can they still claim the employee retention credit?
Yes, they absolutely can. But like I had mentioned, since R&D, WFCC, it's payroll wage driven, you have to be mindful of what wages are allocated towards those incentives to make sure we're not double dipping on the expenses. But yes, we have a ton of clients that we help with other incentives such as R&D, and they're still claiming ERC as well, and the outcome have been very, very strong.
And not just claiming ERC and R&D, but also PPP, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's multiple incentives that it's looking at. So here's the thing is, even if you feel like, oh man, I don't know if I'm going to have the wages left over or percent of the wages, I'm utilizing all my wages, that's actually many times not the case. So that's something where we do all of that analysis up front to determine if this even makes sense for you guys. We'll look at all of that.
Great. So I don't see any other questions. Does anyone else want to submit a question? Please go ahead and throw it in there real quick. Jennifer, Jonathan, I really appreciate your time today and answering this like really critical topic and your presentation. For those who are on the call who maybe they came in late or having some volume issues, we'll be sending a recording link out not only to the membership but to all the participants as well. And did you have a contact us screen, or should I share that?
Yes, I did. For some reason, it just came. It just got pulled down. But what I'll do is I will put it into the chat box, and so that way everyone has it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jonathan. And there are not any more questions from the group about this important topic. Doesn't look like it. But I want to thank you guys both for your time and for sharing the information with us.
Wonderful.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it and look forward to helping you and helping your members, helping those that are on this call.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for everybody that attended.
Great. Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
All right, perfect.